Where did everything come from? I mean, how did life even begin? Can science truly answer these massive questions? Or, does it sometimes just lead us to even bigger ones?
That's a great starting point. Yeah, it often feels like the more we learn, the more questions pop up.
So today we're doing a deep dive into a really intriguing conversation. It explores how some modern scientific discoveries might actually point towards some pretty profound implications for how we understand reality.
Right, maybe even suggesting, for some people at least, the existence of a grand designer. We'll be drawing quite a bit from a recent interview with a philosopher of science.
Ah, okay. He wrote Return of the God Hypothesis, didn't he?
That's the one. And his take on some of these really big public discussions around science and existence.
Okay, so our mission here is to unpack some key scientific findings. The kind that, for certain thinkers anyway, raise some compelling questions about purpose and design in the universe.
Exactly. We want to give you a fresh perspective on what's really a centuries-old debate, but grounded in what science is actually showing us now.
Okay, let's set the scene a bit. There's quite a bit of public discussion around evolution. You might have seen folks like Tucker Carlson, for example, openly questioning if the standard story, all life from one cell, with a neat fossil record, if that fully holds up.
It's interesting you mentioned that public skepticism because there's also a really significant, maybe quieter conversation happening within science itself.
Oh, like what?
Well, back in 2016, there was a major conference. It was convened by the Royal Society.
Wow, okay, the Royal Society in London. That's about as prestigious as it gets, scientifically speaking.
Absolutely. And this wasn't some fringe group. These were leading evolutionary biologists, and many were openly saying they were dissatisfied with the standard neo-Darwinian theory of evolution.
Dissatisfied. So it's not just critics outside science, but experts inside are raising flags. What was their main issue?
The core challenge, really, that many of them brought up was about the mechanism. They argued that natural selection acting on random mutations, well, it lacks the kind of creative power needed to generate the really big changes, the major innovations we see in the history of life.
So it's good at explaining small tweaks, but maybe not the arrival of, say, birds or mammals.
Precisely. Does the mechanism have enough generative power? That's the crux of their dissatisfaction.
Okay, that makes sense. So this leads us to what you might call major hurdles for that traditional view. The first one being the origin of life itself. Darwin didn't really go there, did he?
No, he didn't attempt to explain the very first life. He kind of presumed, one or maybe a few simple organisms were already there to get things started.
But we now know those early cells were anything but simple.
Exactly, far from it. And the whole field of chemical evolutionary theory, trying to figure out how life popped up from non-living chemicals, it's often described, even by people in the field as well, a complete mess.
A complete mess. That sounds pretty serious.
Yeah, it's seen as being in a state of impasse. Even someone like Richard Dawkins has acknowledged there isn't really an adequate theory for the origin of life from non-life. The complexity is just staggering, far beyond what anyone in Darwin's time could have imagined.
Just mind-boggling, really.
Right.
Okay, so the origin of first life is a huge question mark. What's the second major hurdle you mentioned?
That's explaining the big leaps, the major innovations throughout life's history. So the existing mechanism, natural selection on random mutation, it actually does a pretty nice job explaining small-scale variation.
Like the finch beaks.
Yeah, exactly, like Darwin's finches. Beaks get a bit bigger, a bit smaller, adapting to weather patterns. That's microevolution, adaptation. It's real, we see it. But it does a very poor job, according to these scientists, of explaining the macro changes, the origin of fundamentally new things like birds, mammals, or even the first animals.
And the fossil record. Does that show the smooth, gradual changes the traditional theory might predict for these big jumps?
Well, that's another point they raise. Often in the fossil record, you see very abrupt appearances of new forms. You don't always find those clear transitional intermediates that you'd expect from the classic Darwinian picture of slow, gradual change.
Abrupt appearances.
Yeah. And these kinds of issues, these explanatory deficits, were really laid out at that 2016 Royal Society conference. I remember the opening speaker, a prominent Austrian evolutionary biologist, he listed like 5 major explanatory deficits of neo-Darwinism.
5, wow.
And a lot of them circled back to this core problem. The mechanism just doesn't seem to have the required generative or creative power for the big picture of life.
That is genuinely thought-provoking.
Yeah.
especially coming from within the mainstream scientific community. Okay, so this seems like a perfect bridge to talking about this Return of the God Hypothesis book and its approach. You mentioned it uses inferring to the best explanation.
That's right. It's a standard method of scientific reasoning, really. Think of it like being a detective at a crime scene.
Okay, I like that analogy.
You look at all the clues, all the evidence in this case, the observable evidence from the universe, from physics, from biology, and you ask, which hypothesis, which underlying story provides the best, most coherent explanation for all of this data taken together?
So it's about which explanation fits the facts best.
Exactly. Richard Dawkins actually framed the alternative view quite well. He said something like, the universe has precisely the properties we should expect if at bottom there is no purpose, no design, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference.
Right, a purely materialistic viewpoint.
Yes. And the God hypothesis, or more broadly, an intelligent design hypothesis, flips that. It argues that maybe the properties we observe actually align better with a universe that does have purpose or design behind it. And the book highlights 3 major scientific discoveries from the last century or so to build that case.
Okay, let's dive into those. Discovery number 1, the Big Bang. The beginning of the universe. What was the thinking before that discovery?
Well, back in the early 20th century, the prevailing view, certainly among many materialist thinkers, was an expectation, maybe even a hope for evidence of an eternal universe.
That it always existed.
Yeah, always been there, self-existent. Because if it was always there, well, you wouldn't need an external creator or cause.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. But that's not what the astronomers found.
Not at all. Instead, astrophysicists, cosmologists, they gathered overwhelming evidence that our universe had a definite beginning. A moment of creation, which we now call the Big Bang, roughly 13.8 billion years ago.
And the implication of a beginning is?
It's profound. If the universe had a beginning, it couldn't have caused itself. Logically, something can't bring itself into existence before it exists.
Right, because there was no it there to do the causing.
Precisely. Before the matter and energy of the universe came into being, there was no matter or energy to cause it. So this points strongly towards a cause that must be external to the material universe itself, something not bound by space and time as we know them.
A cause outside of nature.
Yes, and possessing attributes like, well, volition, the ability to choose to create an immense causal power, which interestingly aligns very closely with how traditional theism describes God, a transcendent, powerful, initiating cause.
So the discovery of the Big Bang, ironically perhaps, provided evidence consistent with a creator?
For many, yes. It certainly overturned that expectation of an eternal, self-sufficient cosmos.
Okay, that's a huge one. What's the second discovery pointing towards design?
This one comes from biology, specifically the discovery of the complexity and, crucially, the information at the heart of life. You have to remember back in the 19th century, someone like Thomas Huxley described the cell as just a
simple homogeneous globule of undifferentiated protoplasm, wasn't that the phrase?
That's the one, just simple jelly, basically.
Which we now know is just wildly inaccurate.
Oh, completely. We now understand that even the simplest living cell is packed with nanotechnology. It's like an incredibly sophisticated, automated factory. And at its core is DNA.
Deoxyribonucleic acid, the blueprint.
Exactly. But it's more than just a blueprint. It's an exquisite system for storing, transmitting, and processing information. Digital information stored in a 4-character chemical code.
Digital, like computer code.
Very much like it. Francis Crick, who co-discovered the DNA structure, he immediately saw that the chemical subunits, the nucleotide bases, function like alphabetic characters in writing or like digital characters, the zeros and ones in software.
That parallel is striking. Has anyone else made that connection?
Oh, definitely. Bill Gates famously said, DNA is like a software program, only much more complex than any we've ever devised. Richard Dawkins, too, acknowledges DNA functions like a machine code.
So the argument is, where does that kind of information come from?
Precisely. The argument presented is that in our universal, uniform experience, whenever we find information of that specific kind, digital, alphabetic, code-based, instructional, it always traces back to a mind, an intelligent source.
Not just random physical or chemical processes.
No. Material processes alone don't spontaneously generate functional, specified information like we see in DNA. So the inference is that the presence of this digital code at the foundation of life is powerful, perhaps even decisive, evidence for the activity of a designing intelligence in the origin of the first life.
Wow. From the cosmos down to the cell. Okay, what's the third discovery?
The third one is back to physics and cosmology. It's the discovery of the extreme fine-tuning of the universe's physical laws and constants, sometimes called anthropic fine-tuning.
The Goldilocks universe idea.
Yeah.
Not too hot, not too cold, just right for life.
Exactly that. What scientists found, starting really mid-20th century and continuing today, is that the fundamental parameters of physics, things like the strength of gravity, the electromagnetic force, the ratio of particle masses, the expansion rate of the universe, they fall within incredibly narrow, exquisitely precise ranges.
And if they were just slightly different.
Even slightly different, life as we know it would be impossible. In many cases, even basic chemistry wouldn't be possible. Stars couldn't form, or planets couldn't hold atmospheres, or complex molecules couldn't assemble. The universe would be sterile.
Can you give an example of that precision? It sounds almost unbelievable.
Sure. A commonly cited one is the cosmological constant. This relates to the force causing the universe's expansion to accelerate. Its value is considered fine-tuned to something like 1 part in 10 to the 90th power.
10. With 90 zeros after it. That's hard to even grasp.
It is. It's an insane level of precision. If that value were just a tiny, tiny bit larger, the universe would have blown apart too quickly for galaxies or stars to form. A tiny bit smaller, and it might have collapsed back on itself in a big crunch long ago. Either way, no life.
And this kind of fine-tuning applies to many different constants and conditions.
Yes. Dozens of them. It's a cumulative case. And significantly, physicists did not expect this. They didn't expect life to be balanced on such a knife edge of improbably precise physical parameters. It was a real surprise.
Did this discovery cause any ripples, philosophically speaking, among scientists?
Oh, absolutely. The most famous example is probably Sir Fred Hoyle. He was a brilliant astrophysicist, but also a staunch scientific atheist. He actually coined the term Big Bang as a way to mock the theory initially.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. But Hoyle himself discovered some crucial fine-tuning related to how carbon essential for life is synthesized in stars. And this, along with other fine-tuning evidence, led him to a major philosophical shift.
What did he say?
He famously stated later in his life that a common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature.
Monkeyed with physics. That's quite a statement from someone like Hoyle.
It really is. Coming from him, it carried a lot of weight. It showed how the scientific data itself could push even a committed skeptic towards considering design.
So let's just recap these 3 big points. We have the universe having a definite beginning, implying an external cause. We have the discovery of complex digital information in DNA at the foundation of life, suggesting an intelligent source for that information.
Check again.
And we have the discovery that the fundamental physical parameters of the universe are exquisitely fine-tuned for life's existence against all odds.
That's the trio. And the argument is that taken together, these discoveries provide significant evidence that points towards, well, the return of the God hypothesis, or at least towards intelligent design, as perhaps the best explanation for these features of reality.
It's certainly compelling stuff. These aren't just abstract philosophical points. They're rooted in major scientific findings of the last 100 years or so.
Exactly. They challenge that purely materialistic, blind, pitiless, indifference view of the universe and invite us, maybe compel us, to look at the world, at life, at the cosmos with perhaps new eyes. It's about letting the evidence lead where it may.
It really does make you stop and think. If science keeps revealing a universe that looks so deliberately set up, so just right for beings like us to be here observing it, what does that actually imply about our place in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, what does it imply about the nature of reality itself?
Definitely something for you to ponder. What implications does all this have for how you view the universe? A question to mull over until our next deep dive.